This is the video for Monday, April 1st. What does the phrase saving for a rainy day mean? What, if anything, are you doing to save for a rainy day? Go ahead and answer the bell work, and when you are done, go ahead and resume the video. All right, so why is an emergency fund important? What do you gain by being prepared for the unexpected? And what would happen if you didn't have an emergency fund and something actually happens? I do want you to offer your own answers to these, but I will talk about them on my own for a minute. Having an emergency fund is important because you never know what is going to happen and what you're going to have to pay for at any given time. You never know if your car is going to break down. You never know if your water heater is going to die. You never know if your air conditioning is going to die. There's a lot of things that might happen. You never know when you'll have a surprise medical bill. And it's always a better idea to be able to pay for it up front than having to go into debt for it. You don't want to go into debt because debt is it's a weight that hangs around your neck on some of these things. So having an emergency fund is super important. Most experts expect that you have an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months expenses. And that's because who knows what could happen. You could lose your job. There's all kinds of times when people have some unexpected thing happen. Last year when we were talking about this, nobody thought that we were going to say, well, what happens if there's a worldwide pandemic and a lot of people lose their job or just aren't able to work or aren't able to make as much money? So it's important to have an emergency fund set aside because you don't know what's going to happen. What do you gain by being prepared for the unexpected? I think you gain a lot of things. I think you gain your financial ability to confront one of those things. You gain a practical sense of not having to go into debt for something, but also there is just something so emotionally freeing about being prepared for the unexpected, about having the money there in case something happens. It's so nerve-wracking and scary even to be sitting there with no money in the bank account, using every money that comes in and goes out every month. You don't want that. So you would gain maybe a mental preparedness, some peace of mind by being prepared for the unexpected. And that peace of mind is hard to quantify. What would happen if you didn't have an emergency fund and something actually happened? Well, one of two things would happen depending on what that thing is. One of those things, it happens all the time. People are actually having some dire financial consequences where maybe they can't afford to make a housing payment and they have their house taken or something like that. But the other thing that could happen, which is a little bit not quite as bad as that, would be having to go into debt for things. You have to go into debt to pay for your bills and things like that. You put those on a credit card and you end up paying more for them in the long run. So I want you to make a list of other long-term expenses you might occur in the future. These are things that you are expecting. We set aside money for emergencies. We also set aside money for long-term needs like college, buying a home, and retirement. So any of those could be things that you put in that box. The younger you start saving, the more your money will grow. If you start saving for retirement right now, you'll have 4 times as much money by the time you're 65 than if you start saving for retirement when you're my age. Most people my age are still looking around waiting to start saving for retirement, and it's going to take a whole lot longer for them. So it is very important for you to start saving money early. Now, where should you keep your money? This is a difficult thing because you think, okay, well, I should keep money. Maybe I just keep it in my bank account. What should I do? Part of creating a good savings plan is assessing where your money is best kept to maximize savings. What do you do with the money you receive? Specifically, do you cash your paycheck or deposit it? Checking or savings? How do you spend or save it? So I want you to answer that question based on you. I'll talk about me for a second. My money goes direct deposit into my checking account at the bank. I don't deal with a lot of cash, but sometimes I'll take out cash when I need to, but usually just into the checking account at the bank. We have a separate account for our savings, and that is where our emergency fund sits. It just sits there in that separate account. not all banks or savings accounts are the same. You have a lot of choices when it comes to saving and investing your money. So in your notes, you'll see where it says click on this link to learn more about types of accounts. You can click on that link, and when you do, you'll basically see what I'm showing on the screen. So I'm going to talk about each of these for a little bit while you play the video and listen, and then at the end you will have some time to answer those questions on your own. So the first one is a certificate of a deposit. This is a savings certificate issued by a bank or a credit union. So the pros of this are that it has higher interest rates than a traditional savings account. You put your money into a traditional savings account, you get very, very low rates of returns. It's not risky because it's FDIC insured, it's backed by the bank. And that would be the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is FDIC. And the longer term, the higher the interest you usually earn. So if you agree to leave your money in that bank for a decade or for 2 or 3 decades, then you're going to earn even higher interest. Now, what are the cons? Why wouldn't you just put your money into a CD? It must be left in the bank for a fixed amount of time. So you say, I'm going to put this $10,000 in the bank for 10 years and I'm going to get such and such interest rate. Okay, that might be fine, but you can't touch it within those 10 years. So, and there's steep penalties for withdrawing money early. So if you say it's only been 5 years, I want to withdraw money, you would have been better keeping it in the savings account. And then there's a minimum balance required. You can't just do this for a little bit of money. You have to do this for larger chunks of change. And the reason that CDs exist are for the banks. The banks make their money by lending out to people, and so it limits some of their risk and liability if they know that they're going to have that $10,000 you lent them for the next 10 years. They're able to loan it out to somebody over that time because they're not worried that you're going to come in and try to take your money. So that might be something for if you have some money that you have to save for the long term. I don't currently have any CDs, and I don't really believe in CDs. Generally speaking, I would prefer to keep money in a savings account or a money market account that I'm saving and use the rest of the money for investing. And we'll talk more about that later. The second one of these is a savings account. Every bank account has a savings account attached to it. This is just a place where you put money in and it just sits there. It's FDIC insured. It's not risky at all. There's no restrictions on withdrawals. You can keep withdrawing all the time, and there's low or no minimum balance required, but it has very, very, very low interest rates. In fact, the money that sits in your savings account actually loses value because it's growing with small interest rates, but as inflation happens, it actually loses value. And some banks charge fees for opening and maintaining accounts. If you have a bank that charges a fee for opening and maintaining an account, don't use that bank. Find a different bank or get them to waive that. Next is a money market account. A money market account is basically a savings account with 1 or 2 slight differences. So the difference is that it is a higher interest than a savings account, and you can still withdraw money unlike a CD. The problem is that first of all, there's a higher minimum balance, and there are withdrawal restrictions. So if you're somebody who is withdrawing money every single week from your savings account, a money market account is not for you. So it might be a certain number per month or a certain number per year. It depends on the account. Probably the less withdrawals you can have, the higher the interest rate you might get. And it is subject to fees if the balance is below a certain amount. So what I would recommend, and this is what I do, is I have an emergency fund of about 3 months expenses, and it just sits in a money market account. I don't touch it. I don't touch it to pay for home repairs. I don't touch it to pay for car insurance. I don't touch it to pay for anything because the money that goes in and out exists in my checking account. The money of the 3 to 6 months of expenses just sits there in a money market account gaining interest, and I don't have to worry about it. It's not a CD. I can withdraw it whenever I want, whenever I have to. If I ever have something super expensive, like a new roof I have to put on my house or a new HVAC unit or something like that, I can withdraw it. But I'm not really too worried about the withdrawal restrictions because I'm not withdrawing money. And so for me, in that emergency fund, it's better than using it on it's better certainly than using it in in a savings account. Next is a retirement account. A retirement account is an IRA or 401k that helps you set aside money for retirement. So IRAs are one of the more risky ones, retirement accounts, one of the more risky ones. But the reason that people do it is because there is tax deferred growth. So what that means is that I can take money out of my paycheck without paying taxes on it, and I can put it into an IRA, an individualized retirement account, and it can grow tax-free, and then I don't have to pay taxes on it until I withdraw that money. And some employers will match for contribution. It helps create long-term savings. Everybody should have some sort of a retirement account, because we all know that Social Security is not going to be around when you and I are ready to withdraw for it. The negative towards a retirement account is that there are steep penalties for withdrawing money before retirement. You have to be 59 and a half years old to withdraw money from an IRA. And if you try to withdraw money before that, you're going to pay a 10% penalty plus taxes. So this is money that I have decided that I'm not touching until I'm 59 and a half. But this is exactly what I talk about when I say that if you start saving now, you'll have 4 times as much money as if you start saving when you're my age. When I say saving like that, I mean in a retirement account, because money put into the typical 401k or IRA doubles every 7 years. So it's going to kind of go along with the stock market. Sometimes bonds make it a little safer, but a little lower reward. It's really just a risk reward calculation. And actually, most individualized retirement accounts are going to be very heavy into stocks early in your time, and because you have more time to ride the waves of the market, and then they get more heavy into bonds as you get older, because if there's a big financial crash right before it's time for you to retire, you're going to lose a lot of that money. And so it gets safer as it comes time for you to start withdrawing. So IRAs are a very important thing for you to get. A 401k would be through your employer. An IRA would be individual. A 403b, which is not on the screen, but a 403b would be like a 401k, but through a nonprofit. That's what I have. I have a 403b because the school is, in fact, a nonprofit. And then you might have heard the term Roth IRA. Much more about Roth IRAs and things like that later. But a Roth IRA is where you pay the taxes ahead of time. So if I pay taxes on money and then put it into a Roth IRA, it would grow tax-free instead of tax-deferred. So with a regular IRA, I don't pay taxes on that money. It comes directly out of my paycheck before I pay taxes on it. And then it grows tax-deferred, and I have to pay taxes on it later. With a Roth IRA, I do pay taxes on it right at the beginning, and then I don't have to pay taxes at the end. If you can afford to do so, I prefer a Roth IRA. Roth IRAs, because they grow tax-free and the money that sits in the account is all yours and you never have to pay taxes on it because you've already paid taxes on it, that's the best. Okay, so comparing that to a 529 savings account, a 529 savings account is exactly the same as a retirement account, with one very key difference, and that is that instead of the money being spent on retirement, instead of you being eligible to spend the money when you're 59 and a half, the money must be spent on educational expenses. For most people, this means college. So this is going to be a tax-deferred account that you put money into, and it grows, and you don't have to pay taxes on the growth. You just have to pay taxes on the money when you take it out. And so you can definitely do that. So that is good. You can use that for college. You can also, if you choose, use that for private high schools or middle schools or parochial schools or whatever. So that would be a 529 savings account. It's very similar to a retirement account, except for education instead of retirement. There are some pros: low minimum starting balance. Some states offer tax breaks, tax deferred growth. And then the cons are, if you decide not to use it for college, you will face a 10% penalty. So that is always one of the cons. If, let's say that your grandpa opened a 529 for you, and there's a bunch of money sitting in that 529, and you decide to be a DJ instead, when you don't go to college. Well, in that case, in order to get that money out, grandpa's going to have to pay a 10% penalty. So it's something where you do have to make sure that it is going to be used for educational expenses. So there's a couple different types of 529s. One type of 529 is the investment account, where you can put money in and invest it in the market or in bonds or things like that. And the other type is a savings account, where there's just tax deferred savings. So that would work either way there. And then the next one is, I believe it's the last one. No, a couple more. Next one is mutual funds. Mutual funds are a collection of stocks, bonds, and other investments that are managed professionally in a portfolio. It creates an opportunity to diversify investment, but the return is not guaranteed. So this one is risky. It's about as risky as a retirement account. There might be days where it goes up and it goes down. I bought into a mutual fund for our How the Market Works game and our stock market game, and it's about even right now. It's gone up some, and then it went down some, and then it went back up some, and now it's about even. So it's going to be based on what's happening in the stock market. There might be some fees involved with that, but mutual funds are a great way for you to grow your money without having to wait for it for retirement. So if you've got a chunk of money, you've got, I don't know, 10 grand, and you have 10 years to save it, and you have some comfortability with some risk, you want it to grow, you're not comfortable with the 2 or 3% growth that you might get in a CD. So you might put it into a mutual fund and allow it to grow for the next decade, but you know that you're going to want it before retirement. And that's what you would do for a mutual fund. Or if you have maxed out your retirement account and you want to save even more. Retirement accounts only have tax deferred growth for a certain amount of that. There's not tax deferred growth in a mutual fund. So once you cash out on a mutual fund, you would have to pay 15% of the money that you made in capital gains taxes, because anytime you own an asset that grows in value, you have to pay a 15% capital gains tax. And we'll talk more about that later when we get to investing. We got two more here. The next one is stocks. We've talked about stocks before. A stock is a share in the ownership of a company. So if you buy Apple stock, that means that you are a part owner of Apple. Congratulations. And so the risk varies depending on investment choice. If you are buying a single stock, in any case, it is risky. If you're buying a single stock of Apple, it's much less risky than if you're buying a single stock of some tech startup, right? If you're buying a tech startup, it could explode and be the next Apple. It could also disappear and go bankrupt and have no value. So you're almost gambling when you buy stocks, depending on what the stock is. I do not recommend that you buy single stocks, because for every person who buys a single stock and hits on it, most people who buy a single stock, they lose money on that. So if the market value decreases, there is potential for great loss. In fact, it could almost disappear. You see stocks that lose 50% in one day because there's a report that their product causes cancer, and then you just lost half your money. You put 10 grand into that stock, and the next day the report comes out that their product causes cancer. You just lost 5 grand. That's definitely not good. Now, the other side, though, is that they might get bought out by Apple the next day, and their stock might double in value, and so now you've got 20 grand. You just never know with stocks. It is basically gambling, depending on which one you buy. There's no guarantee for return on investment. Principal could be lost. And then managing stock options may require professional help. You can do that on something like Robinhood, where you can, or even Cash App. If you're on Cash App, you can buy stock through Cash App and hold on to it for a little bit. One of the things, though, is with day trading, which is where you buy and sell stocks all the time. In other words, you don't hold stocks for a year. You have to pay a higher percentage of that capital gains tax than you would if you held it for more than a year. So assets held for more than a year are 15% capital gain, and then assets held for less than a year are a 24% capital gain. So keep that in mind when you start buying and selling stocks. And then the last one is a bond. A bond is a loan to the government in which you're the lender and the government is the borrower. So we look at the national debt clock, and we see that we're approaching $30 trillion in national debt. And you say, well, who are we in debt to? Well, we're in debt to anybody who wants to buy American bonds. You can buy American bonds, and so and chances are you or maybe even your parents have some American bonds. And those are something where you buy it, and then over the course of a decade or a century, or depending on how long it takes, those bonds will mature and they'll be worth more money later. So that is it. Or it could be bought by foreign governments, and that could be dangerous. You could see how it might be dangerous to have the Chinese buying American bonds, and now the United States is in debt to China. So that's where our national debt goes. So, but these are going to be lower return rates. One big disadvantage to bonds, which is why I don't like bonds, especially right now, is that if I buy a bond and it's going to mature over 10 years, well, it's worth less now than it is in 10 years, which is why you would do it. You would get a guaranteed rate of over those 10 years. However, with inflation, it's not going to be worth quite what it says it's going to be worth, right? So maybe your bond is going to be worth $1,000 in 10 years, but in 10 years, that $1,000 isn't going to be worth as much as it would be today. So I don't typically prefer bonds. Bonds might be a good thing if you're really close to retirement and you need something kind of safe, but otherwise, I don't necessarily believe that much in bonds. All right, so that is a quick overview of all of those things. I've got 9 questions here. These 9 questions are in your notes. And so I want you to go ahead and answer them. You can go back and watch the video again to get those answers, or you can click on the link in your notes and use that.